You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin. He's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. I forgot to mention it's episode 329, Pat. How's it going?
Oof. Yeah, it feels like 329 episodes this week, but yeah, it's going all right.
What a difference a week makes. We were just here last week. Optimism flying high. We've got a lot to unpack. The Cubs have collapsed. And to help us either talk us off the cliff or help us unpack some of the what's going on with this collapse, we had to turn to longtime friend of the show. You know him from his fantastic writings at the website cubsinsider.com. Evan Altman, thanks for taking time out to help us figure out what's going on with the Cubs tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, especially again, as I mentioned, as we were talking before the show. It's a wonderful evening because the Cubs are not playing, the Bears are not playing, and the ineptitude of apparently all four teams taking part in Monday Night Football kind of gives me hope that maybe the Bears aren't the worst team in the NFL. Although I don't know if that's good or bad right now.
Yeah, between our pre-show Bears podcast and now about to unpack the Cubs collapse, I had to go for the Brown stuff. So I've got the I've got the Eagle Rare tonight to help me get through this podcast.
Very nice.
So let's take a look. Like I mentioned, a lot can happen in a week, Pat, and we were flying high after watching the Cubs. They split with Cincinnati, then they swept the San Francisco Giants. We were confident until just a tough stretch. They lost 3 out of 4 to Arizona, but they were going to get a break because they were playing the Colorado Rockies, and they're an incompetent ball club. But it didn't work out that way. They dropped 2 out of 3 in Colorado, and then the skid continued. 3 more losses to make it 5 in a row, losing 3 to the Diamondbacks. Which extra hurts because this is the team that was trying to catch the Cubs for that final playoff position. This was hard to watch.
They caught the Cubs. They passed the Cubs.
That they did.
Yeah.
At the time of this recording, just a quick update on the standings of where we are at the point of this conversation. The Phillies are in the first wild card. Arizona now in the second wild card. And the final wild card spot is a tie between the Cubs and the Reds. The Reds are 1 game back in the loss column for that final spot.
And 1 game ahead in the win column. So
correct.
Exactly tied. The Phillies appear to be on the verge of winning tonight in the 9th inning, up 7-1. That'll put the Cubs 4 games behind the Phillies, for whom I believe the Phillies own the tiebreaker with the Cubs. So the Cubs would have to gain 5 games on the Phillies if they were to get the vaunted home field playoff game to start, or playoff advantage, or home field advantage. So that's unlikely to happen, but you never know. Arizona half game ahead, the Reds tied, the Marlins half game behind. And the Giants, who I thought actually had quit playing baseball this year after the Cubs beat them, are only 2 games behind the Cubs. The Cubs are actually far closer to the Giants than they are to the Phillies. And then as far as the division's concerned, obviously the Brewers are pretty far ahead at this point, but they are losing today for what it's worth. And yet, I'm more optimistic than everybody. Everybody's like the sky is falling in. I don't think that's the case. I think the Cubs are still going to make the playoffs. Am I the only one left?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean,
I think the Cubs are.
They can, right? I mean, they're not. They're certainly. They've got plenty of time left. They have 2 garbage teams coming up, but one of those garbage teams should beat them 2 out of 3 times. and could have beat them all
Colorado
three.
looks different. Yeah, it feels
Yeah.
different now on the
Look,
schedule.
so the Cubs went 1-5 last week. That's all. They're going to go 5-1. Well, I won't give away my prediction, but they're going to go 5-1 this week. They're going to sweep Colorado, and they're going to beat the Pirates 2 out of 3. So at the end of this week, the Cubs will be 4 games better off. And I don't know. I think, looking at the schedule of some of the Cubs' opponent or fellow contenders,
we'll get
for
there.
Playoff spot.
I don't want to get get too far ahead of ourselves yet because I'm not.
No. I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm just saying. I don't think the Cubs' position is as desperate as people think. The Cubs have been hot and cold this year. They've been hot for so long. People forget, the cold parts. But they've got some injuries. They've got some issues. But so does everybody at this point. And I actually think the Cubs' schedule is going to play out a little bit better than people realize, because while the Cubs do play the Braves and Brewers to end the year, I think we might get really lucky in that those games may not have any impact on those opponents. In other words, I don't think Atlanta is going to have anything to play for. They'll have clinched everything by then, and I think the Brewers will have too. So we might actually be facing some lesser competition as they prepare themselves for the playoff run. And I think the Cubs are going to go 5-1 against these bad teams, and then they're going to play those 2 teams and do fine. That's what I think. Right?
Well, I think it'll help us because I think some of this is around the uncertainty of what the heck happened. So Evan, help us. So I found it difficult when I've had people ask me what's gone wrong with the Cubs. I've had a difficult time trying to pinpoint it to one thing. It seems like it's many things that have all gone wrong all at once.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does seem, and it's and I wrote about it a little bit today, and I think it's tough because it gets so binary. A lot of people. Here's the thing. I think what we all know, if you watch the games, if you watch them play, they look gassed, right? And I'm not even necessarily saying that they're all physically worn out and tired, but mentally, I think it takes a lot. Like it's no different from a pitcher. If you are throwing in a tie game, if you're throwing late in the game, every one of those pitches is more stressful on you than if you have a 10-0 lead in the second inning and you're throwing. Similarly, I think this is a team that has had to exert itself so much in the second half, right? They made such a great run and things were going. And I think a lot of these guys are putting the pressure on themselves mentally, right? We saw, and what's interesting to me though is we've seen what happened with Seiya Suzuki when, again, he was kind of stressed. He wasn't having fun. Ross sits him for a few days. He's been the Cubs' best hitter ever since, but it doesn't feel like the rest of these guys are getting that kind of a break to sort of physically and maybe more so mentally recalibrate. I think you're seeing the results of a bunch of dudes who really, really care and are pressing so much that they're maybe holding on a little too tightly, and it's hurting them right now.
In fairness, they did take off the month of May, so they should have been rested from that. But I think that there can be something to that. And obviously, Dansby Swanson looks pretty exhausted these days. He isn't hitting, especially in the clutch. His fielding has even taken a step back last week and a half, I think. And so you're getting, in addition to the injuries, your big trade deadline acquisition is on the IL. Your closer's on the IL. Your starting pitching has been kind of held together by, bubble gum and Band-Aids, I think, right, for most of the year, and maybe some of the luck is running out there. When Wicks goes through the league a couple times now, people are going to catch on to some of his stuff, and Assad's thrown a lot of innings. Steele's thrown the most. Most of these guys have thrown more innings this year than they have their whole careers, and so they're kind of at that breaking point too. So I mean, there are a lot of things coming together that are negative, but this team has been so streaky this year. There are guys like Morel, who seems to be hitting better lately, and others who just kind of go hot and cold. We've seen that with, as you pointed out, Evan. We saw that with Suzuki. I think they're just It's just these waves, and nothing like coming home and facing bad teams. That's even better than facing bad teams on the road. And I just think the Cubs are going to come home. They're going to have a couple of laughers. And next week at this time, we're going to be chomping at the bit to play that last week of the season. And I think the Cubs, who currently, I guess would not make the playoffs because technically the Reds have the tiebreaker, but they're right there. I think the Cubs will be in one of the 3 wild card slots when we talk again next week. Yay!
Woohoo!
I'm glad you brought up Dansby Swanson. He's struggled a ton over at Northside Baseball. Friend of the podcast, Matt Trueblood, wrote up about some of his struggles in late innings, extra innings, and against relievers in general. This is this hurts this offense when Dansby Swanson isn't performing, Evan.
Yeah, and I mean, and he was one of them who had looked so good early on too, right? Like we're seeing that, and as Pat had noted, the offense will be one thing if we're seeing this guy who is an immaculate Gold Glove defender at short, but I wonder how much is he. Again, we talk about guys who are pressing, is what's happening at the plate carrying over, because there are just, it looks like he's a step slow or a tick behind at the plate. Like he just doesn't seem to be moving as well on either side. I mean, and this is the guy, right? This is the big ticket free agent, the one you brought in here to be a leader. And while I have no doubt that from an emotional standpoint, he's one of the steadying forces there in the clubhouse and in the dugout and everything else, it is really difficult when this is a guy right there in the heart of your order. And how many times have we seen this team, if we look back over these games, they swept the Giants, they scored 8 runs in that game. I think they've only scored more than 4 one time since, and that took 14 innings or whatever to get to, right? Like they're and look at how they're scoring. Like yesterday, and this has happened twice in the was it twice against the Diamondbacks alone, or once against the D-backs and once against the Rockies, where they had the bases loaded and scored on a double play, right? So it's like you got to run, but you have 2 outs at the same time. So now you went from bases loaded, no outs, you got to run home, but that was it. And it's just, they're these weird, or the Cody Bellinger fly out to second base that gets dropped, and like they're not even scoring in these ways that make it feel like they could put rallies together. It's like they're getting lucky at times. And again, Swanson is part of that, to where they don't seem to want to score runs late in the games. They'll get a couple early, and it's just like, that's it. And you're like, hey boys, 2 runs, not going to get it done today. But I think that just when you do have someone who's a leader like that, and they're not really able to step it up in those situations, I do feel like, again, from a psychological standpoint, that does kind of hurt, because who do you look to, right? When things are going wrong, when things are going bad, you look to the leaders. And if they are not there to kind of pick up that slack, it maybe becomes a little bit more difficult on some of the guys down the order.
640 OPS in innings 7 through 9, 0 for 7 with a walk in extra innings, and a 660 OPS against all relievers overall for Dansby Swanson.
It's not great.
That's tough.
Oh, that's Nick Madrigal territory. Yeah, no, it is not great. And look, we knew coming into the year that this was a flawed team, and in some ways they've outperformed our expectations. Certain players certainly have, but the flaws are still there. And this is just bad timing for some of them to rear their ugly heads. I half thought that maybe the Cubs are trying to make us look like geniuses by actually matching our preseason expectations. It would, of course, require them to lose their last 17 in a row. But at the rate they're going, yeah, they are doing that. Yeah, it's frustrating, but it's only 6 games. I don't know. I still look at this. I know the timing couldn't be worse, right? But I still look at this and think that the Cubs can just as easily turn it around this week against these bad teams, and we'll just feel a lot better. I mean, it always looks bad when you lose, and they haven't exactly been getting crushed in most of the games. They play a lot of close games. They play a lot of 1 and 2 run games. That's just sort of how they're built. And for a while they were winning them, and now they're losing them. So there you go. But yeah, I can see why people are a little bit disappointed, but I feel like people are kind of dismissing them and kind of turning the page on the season already, and I think that's silly. Right?
It is silly.
Okay, good. Because I don't want. If I'm the optimist, then I think we're in trouble. So,
Well, although, again, but I think you drop 5 straight, right? And like I said, I think if these were games where they were like 10-9 or something like that, it still sucks. But as I said, they're not scoring, and that was the thing that was the big difference to me is when the early part of the second half of the season. It was them and the Braves. When you looked at the best offenses in baseball, like the Cubs were hitting the ball out of, and that's what I looked at. And I used that kind of the Suzuki thing as the line of demarcation when I looked at it. It's not an even split, but just using that as kind of, hey, we tried this with this guy and look what happened. But even as a team, if you look at up until August 9th, they had hit 41 homers and I think scored 169 runs, which is nice, through like an aggregate, 950 some plate appearances. And in the time since, they've had like 1,350 plate appearances, same 41 home runs and only 170 runs, right? So that we're talking about a 25 game sample versus 36. And so the run scoring is down, the home run hitting is down. And that's something this team wasn't really built for a ton of power, but they were really clubbing teams. And that is such a huge thing. When we talk about the playoffs, you talk about run prevention, that is at its peak once you get into playoff baseball, and the teams that out homer their opponents win just about every time when you're looking at postseason baseball. And that's the part that's troublesome to me, is even going to Colorado, even playing in Arizona, even with the humidors, right? We saw the Rockies blast the Cubs with homers, and the Cubs were like, oh, hey, let's hit 15 warning track fly balls, and
even Chris Bryant's hitting a home run. That hurt too.
Yeah. and it feels, of course, I'm the one that tweeted out, like, I hope he rakes and the Cubs still explode offensively and beat him. And here's Bryant launching home runs and the Cubs lose. So it's my fault.
See, you mentioned, Pat, that the Cubs are playing bad teams. We should be optimistic. One of those bad teams is the Pittsburgh Pirates. And looking ahead to the Cubs pitching probables against the Pirates, Tuesday, Javier Assad. Wednesday, Justin Steele. Thursday, Kyle Hendricks. They're skipping Jameson Taillon, who's usually in between Assad and Steele. Evan, why are we not pitching Taillon against the lowly Pirates here?
Look at what he's been doing. Just there's outside of Drew Smiley, there's not too many guys left who, when they take the mound for a start, you feel bad going into it, right? Like the fact it helps too, right? They have the day off here Monday. They have another day off after this homestand, heading into the Braves and Brewers at the end of the season, and so they've got the ability to stretch that stuff out a little bit, which I think is good. But Taillon's one of those guys too. I don't know if it's a mental reset or what. Like, we saw him for a brief period there, 4 or 5 starts. He looked really, really, like, he looked great against the Yankees, right? And then after that,
6 good starts, right?
Yeah,
give up,
there you go.
0 runs, 3, 1, 1, 2, 2. That's fine. And now we're in a stretch of 8 runs, 4 runs, 4 runs, 5 runs, 5 runs, 0 runs, and then 5. Yeah. And the game where he gave up 0 runs, we lost 1-0. Yeah. It's concerning. And I think, it is the crunch time now, right? And it's the point of the season where you can't really worry about egos, and you worry about somebody, who's got a 4-year deal. You just got to win the games, right? So I support the idea of skipping his start. My concern is, some other guys probably could use some time off, but I just don't know at this point of the season with 12 games to go, can they afford to rest a Dansby Swanson? Like, do they have time left? You can't sit somebody out for a week. You're starting shortstop when you got 2 weeks to go. So I feel like they're just kind of, you can skip a Taillon, but some of the other guys, I just think you're just kind of stuck, and you just have to hope that the one day off helps. I guess I don't know.
Well, making that's what makes matters worse too, right? Jamer Candelario's on the IL. Nick Madrigal pulls up lame with another hamstring issue, so who knows? And so under normal circumstances, you say, well, hey, you can give Dansby a day off, move Nico Horner over to short, put Madrigal at second, no big deal. Wisdom over at third, Candelario at first, or flip that, whatever you want. Well, two of those guys aren't even there, so now how do you move it? The one where I'm continuing to have an issue, though, is why on earth, again, they're not scoring many runs, so now run prevention is an even greater premium. You call up the best defensive center fielder in the minor leagues, one of the top in the majors, and yet the dude gets 2 games in Colorado and isn't playing. And I get it. And a lot of people are like, oh, he can't hit major league. He's got 8 plate appearances. Okay, let's calm down. But he would replace Mike Tauchman, who by all accounts has been, I mean, there's no way better to put. He's been to Cubs. Like Swanson's not been good, but over the last month plus, Tauchman's got like a 60 WRC plus, negative WAR. The defense hasn't been there. Like how do you not say let's get a spark at least out here? That's the part that bothers me right now.
Yeah,
that gets back to the manager, doesn't it?
Yeah, 5 total plate appearances for PCA, and he had that. Awesome. He looked great out in the field in his debut in Colorado. Everyone's raving about he makes his first catch and against the wall, and everyone's all like, oh, look at that. He ran that down. That was great. And then it was the second catch just a couple innings later when the production is looking at a shot hit into the gap. And Pat Hughes on the call is calling it a shot hit to the gap right between center and right. And you're looking and you just see this ball going into the gap. And then PCA comes flying into frame and comes and all the way across and makes the catch. And everyone loses their minds. Rightfully they should, because the way that it was shot, it looked spectacular with him just running into frame. You see this speed that we as Cubs fans are not used to seeing, and it was very exciting to see this guy make this play. And here we are. He's we're talking about his playing time. I can't believe it.
Or lack thereof. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like again that's, and the Canario thing was a little, and I wrote about it, and I feel like there were maybe some ulterior motives to that, and I won't get into all that stuff right now, but I kind of felt like, okay, this was an organizational decision. He was never really brought up to actually play. Again, a variety of reasons there, but the Crow Armstrong thing was different. Like, you don't bring that dude up just to sit on the bench. And then, again, I'm not advocating for Miles Masterboni to play, but he's on the roster and he's only had like 1 plate appearance. Like, they're using him as a pinch runner. And I'm thinking there's no one better in the organization. Like, you can't find what is the point of an expanded roster? What is the point of carrying these players if they literally never play or aren't in there, outside of, again, a pinch run situation, whatever. That's the part that I'm kind of struggling with, the roster construction itself. But again, with the injuries, with other situations, I do not envy David Ross trying to put this together, but I do feel like there's a couple spots where, here's the thing, if Mike Tauchman draws a walk or gets a hit or scores from second on a single, that's cool, but he's done that before, and there's no real excitement there. But if you get Pete Crow Armstrong in there to pick up his first major league hit, he gets a double in the gap, he snags one, like that can change the emotion of the game for the fans, the clubhouse, everything. Like, there's so much more to it than just what's in the box score. And that's what you're supposed to get from these rookies. Other teams that are competing, the Diamondbacks have, I mean, Corbin Carroll's a different story, but they got the Lawler kid that they called up that hasn't been hitting that well. But guess what? He's a phenomenal shortstop. So he's in there more frequently. And
that's a
guess
great
what,
comp.
too?
Yeah. They
They just beat the Cubs 3 games in a row, and they're ahead of the Cubs in the standings. So it's not a matter of them trying to punt the game. I'll get off my soapbox here, but I cannot really understand the usage or, again, lack thereof.
So to correct, I want to make a correction. You were correct. 0 for 8. So he did have 8 plate appearances, 0 for 8 with an RBI for Pete Crow Armstrong, but not an opportunity to work through this. Ian Happ, all the opportunities to work through whatever funk he's in. But Pete Crow Armstrong, that makes me have David Ross thoughts, Pat, and I want to get your thoughts. This is crunch time for the Cubs, but it's really a showcase too for David Ross decisions. Everything he's doing now is really under a microscope here because there's not a lot of games to lose from making a bad decision.
Yeah, I mean, when things are going poorly and you're playing a lot of close games, there's going to be a lot of second guessing of the manager. Obviously, that's sort of a tried and true baseball ism. But I think there are just sort of beyond that. There are some questionable things in terms of player usage, et cetera. Stuff that we've seen really throughout the season, with Ross, not just at the end. And I know a lot of people have been pointing out the Eric Hosmer and the use of Mervis and how that went down and the Mastroboni and a lot of the other sort of questionable, I guess, player playing time decisions, all the way through to the young kids that are up now, and reasonably people are questioning some of those decisions and saying, look, they say that the games matter more at the end of the year, but really, the Cubs could probably have a couple more wins right now if they hadn't waited, or I guess kept some of these veterans in. And this is not the first time this has happened too. We saw this last year with VR and Simmons and others. Ross does tend to rely on his veterans and give them a lot of rope, and it's kind of come back to burn him a little bit this year when you look at where the Cubs are now, and you think of all the at bats that went to guys who really weren't performing at major league levels, and you wish you had some of those games back. So I think he's definitely in the hot seat, and understandably, people say, well, if he doesn't make the playoffs, he should be fired, and he probably will be if they don't make the playoffs, don't you think?
I don't know. I think if they continue on this epic collapse, not that it's epic now, but if it becomes to the point where, hey, they drop 4 out of 6 at home here, and then again lose 3 or 4 out of 6, again, so going 6-8 or whatever it is, that's not that many games, 4-8, right, over the last 4 series. Yeah. I think that might be a little different, and I think that may have to do with, do they feel like he lost the team, which we talk about again about these guys maybe feeling gassed, not feeling at their best, not feeling motivated. To me, that's probably going to be the more telling sign of whether or not they want to keep him around. Do they feel like he lost the clubhouse? If not, these guys are still ready to run through a wall for him, it's a different story. But I do think the seat gets very, very warm if they don't make the postseason, that's for sure.
And I guess it depends on who else is available in the offseason. And of course, the name everybody has been mentioning is Craig Counsell from Milwaukee, which would be a real get. I will go on record as saying if the Cubs could get Counsell, then they should fire Ross to do so, just like I thought they should fire Renteria to get Madden, and I'll stand by that.
I would agree with that. Evan, are you in favor of a Craig Counsell to Chicago?
I mean, you just run the risk of whining every time there's rain. But I mean, it's hard to argue with what he's done. I'm weird about this stuff sometimes because I wonder, like, are some of these guys really good? The Rays, right? They're very, very good at how they run their organization. But sometimes you get somebody out of there, like look at Bloom in Boston now. That's not all on him. But if you go to that bigger organization with a different structure and a different mentality, does it work as well? And that's what I kind of wonder. The Brewers are always seemingly underdogs, and I feel like Counsell does a really good job with that. Although, I mean, it's pretty obvious that he's got the players' attention and respect, and it does always look like he's pulling the right strings, the right levers, pushing the right buttons. So, I mean, Yeah, it's hard to say no, but there's a couple of Will Venables, another guy that's out there, again, former Cub and coach and all that I've heard some good, seen some good things about. So I don't know. I'm not anti-Ross, but I also don't know that he's the guy at this point that can help them kind of move from where they are to where they need to be moving forward.
The thing about Council is he gets all of his players to play as annoyingly good as he was as a player.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, hopefully, you get him out of that situation, and it's not the constraints that are leading to his creativity, but he could actually be more like a Andrew Friedman out of the Rays type of comp, where he's got all these assets at his disposal, and he can finally do all the things that he could never do in a Tampa situation that he could do in LA now. Hopefully, it would be something similar to that with the Cubs. So yeah, I'm all for it. I've been struggling with how I feel about David Ross this season, because a lot of these decisions, you've mentioned Wisdom, Mancini, Barnhart, Mastroboni, Hosmer, all these guys playing ahead of the other guys. The damage that was done to Mervis, as we still don't know what he is based on how he was used when he was here. A lot of that is on David Ross, and coming down to a few games here or there, man. Some of those games where Hosmer and Mancini were playing against the Nationals in May, you wish you had some of those back as you're watching this team down the stretch here. But let's look at what's left for the Cubs. Pat, you started to go down this road.
Yeah.
Let's the Cubs are concerned with their schedule. They're concerned with the Arizona schedule, the Cincinnati schedule, and the Miami schedule.
Yeah, those are the schedules.
Which of those schedules scare you the most?
I think, well, as a Cubs fan, I'm looking at, I think I think the Reds. That's hard to say. The Reds have a fairly easy schedule. I think the Marlins probably have the easiest remaining schedule, right? They play the Mets 6 times, Pirates 3, the Brewers 3. That's 9 bad of their last 12 games. 9 are against bad teams. And they are, of course, basically almost deadlocked with the Cubs at this point. They're half a game behind. Cubs are going to have to really, and the Cubs, of course, don't have. This is the other frustrating part, right? The Cubs do not have the tiebreaker versus any of these teams. So the Phillies,
other than the
the
Giants, right? The Giants are the
Reds,
only one.
Marlins. Right. And if we're fighting the Giants for the last spot, then something really weird has happened. So, look at the Marlins. They've got 9 pretty easy games left on their schedule. That's concerning. The Reds play the Twins 3 times. They won the first one today, I think. And then they play the Pirates 3 times, the Guardians 3 times, and the Cardinals 3 times. It would be just like the Cardinals to lay down like lambs at the end of the season and allow the Reds to walk all over them just to stick it to the Cubs. The Diamondbacks play the Yankees 3 times, which is not the contest it used to be. They play this team called the White Sox on pace for 100 losses. They play them 3 times.
Man.
Play the Giants 3 times and the Astros 3 times. I think overall that schedule might be a little bit more challenging than the other 2 teams, but I feel like the Reds and Marlins really have a pretty open path here. And we've talked about the Cubs schedule a little bit. 6 easy, 6 hard, but those 6 hard games could be a lot less hard if the last 3 games of the year the Brewers are locked into their playoff spot. No need to throw Burns and Woodruff, right?
Setting up the rotation.
Yeah, exactly.
Playoff. Yeah.
And even the Braves, the couple days before, do you really want to use your top starters? If so, you might pitch them for 5 innings and then pull them out, just to kind of get them a little bit of work. And so there's a lot of, that part of the schedule can vary over time. But, it's going to come down to the Cubs just going to win games. And I think, I don't know what, in these last 12, I feel like 8-4 would definitely put the Cubs in the playoffs. I don't know what your thoughts are, but anything less than that, and it gets really dicey.
Yeah, I was going to say that's my concern is more for the Cubs schedule simply because they absolutely need to stack wins right now, like a lot of wins, right?
That's why they're going to go 5-1 this week, to stack those wins.
Yeah, they're pretty much going to have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. I think 8-4. Ooh, that should get it. It's just such a you get such weird baseball at this point. And this is the point of the season. No, I am at least glad that we're not still with the 40-man expanded rosters to where some of these teams would literally just throw out a minor league lineup.
Sure.
Right, late, and just they don't care. So at least you do have to, for the most part, stick with a lot of those. Although it would make me happier if one of the teams in question didn't have 530 home run hitters, that they've got to play. And that's what scares me is that even a Braves team that is, and granted, I mean, the Cubs beat the Braves 2 out of 3 earlier, right? Like that's, lest we forget, the Cubs are capable. They beat the Rays 2 out of 3 when the Rays were the best team in baseball when they came in. So, I mean, that's there, but going down to Atlanta to face that team, even if they're sitting a bunch of guys, it's like you have to sit to get to a dude who hasn't hit 30 home runs. You have to remove more than half the lineup. Yeah. It's crazy.
Jeez.
But it is baseball, and lest we forget, the Brewers lost to the Cardinals 1-0 today. Adam Wainwright shut out the Brewers.
Yikes.
Got his 200th win and lowered his ERA to 7.20. So, or 7.40. I'm sorry, lowered his ERA to 7.40.
He finally got the 200th win, so good riddance.
Yeah, weird things happen in baseball. That's a pretty weird one. And the Cubs just need some of those weird things to happen in their favor, because I will tell you that if the Cubs do not go 5-1 this week, let's say they go 4-2, I'm going to be sweating bullets next week. It's that's pretty close, pretty tight. So it would be nice to get out to lead. And I was dreaming about catching the Phillies until I realized that their last 10 games of the season are against the Mets and Pirates only. So, never mind. The Phillies at the top spot. I cede that.
Yeah, you can pencil in Milwaukee winning the division, Philadelphia with that top spot. Evan, would you rather see the Cubs play at Philadelphia in a best of 3 or play at Milwaukee for a best of 3?
So this is the part like I hate losing more than I love winning. And so losing in Milwaukee to the Brewers would be a far worse fate than losing to the Phillies if those things were to happen. So I always look at like worst case scenario, right? That's where I go from. So I would much rather have them face the Phillies, not really, but also because of the matchup, because if you look at, right, Milwaukee's pitching, the Cubs aren't necessarily hitting all that well right now. I feel like they could face off with Philly, even with all that firepower that they've got at times, that if those guys are hitting, they can hang some runs on you, but I'd rather face them because I don't hate them with the power of 1,000 suns as much as I would hate watching the Brewers beat the Cubs.
But how fun would it be to beat a 92-win Brewers team that ran away with the division? Like beat them 2 games or best 2 out of 3, and they just have to go home, and we don't. That would, I mean, I get the stakes are higher, right? Because losing is losing, but when you're the underdog, I don't know, it's a little bit easier than if you're the favorite, right?
Ideally, but it's still the Brewers.
True.
Yeah.
Like that's getting beat by your little brother.
Yeah.
Or the neighbor kid down the street who's a couple years younger, or something
or like
that.
A squirrel, like a squirrel getting beaten by a squirrel.
Although it would be poetic
stuffed
justice.
Animal.
Maybe the Cubs lose to the Brewers and then steal Craig Counsell away, and then the Brewers just fade back into obscurity, and we can all forget that they were ever any good. That would be worthwhile, I think.
Or the Cubs get matched up with the Brewers, and the Cubs offer a $5 million donation to the Brewers Stadium Fund in exchange for forfeiting the series.
Maybe they can just trade for Counsell in the middle of the series.
Yes.
Take him, and then
as compensation, pay like cash or something.
And then Milwaukee can announce that they are indeed moving to Oakland after the A's vacate for Vegas.
Right. Right.
or Nashville or wherever, parts unknown. Another city where they will be outdrawn when the Cubs come to visit them.
I think I'd like to see the Cubs crawl up one spot here, back to where they were at the beginning of the week, and play at Philadelphia. I do for all the points you made, Evan. I think that Cubs at Phillies for a best of 3. I like that matchup a lot better. In a short series against Milwaukee, I'm uncomfortable, especially in Milwaukee. No thanks. I'd much rather see the Cubs play the Phillies, but I'd much rather just see the Cubs make it hang on to this spot, get there, and we'll see where the chips land. Right.
I will take the path least traveled and say that I would prefer to play the Brewers because I don't think that their offense is very good, and that would help the Cubs more in a series. But I understand your points to the contrary. But just to clarify, either the Cubs aren't making the playoffs and Ross is fired, or we're talking about who we're going to play in the first round, right? That's the that's the conversation.
Yeah, I don't know about Ross being fired. I mean, the front office, it's their yes man, like unless they're gonna unless they've got an upgrade like you mentioned, unless it's an upgrade situation where it's an obvious we have to make this move. I think they like having a yes man.
Do you still have that guy they got from Cleveland? What do they call him? He's like a general something, like a general
Hawkins.
Yeah, general director, general manager. That's the title, right?
Still,
is he still there?
Still there.
Never see or hear from him.
Yeah, he was. I'm trying to remember when he was on a broadcast last. He actually seemed quite a bit more congenial than maybe what I remember. At first, I was kind of like, boy, this definitely seems like a dude who is meant to be kind of neither seen nor heard, sort of. He was just sort of like, you stay in the back. But it is interesting, though, right, how the Cubs do this, like, title inflation thing, because Jed Hoyer's the president of baseball operations, but realistically, he's the GM, right? Like, he's
100%
doing all this.
Yes.
And then Carter Hawkins is really, the assistant GM, but he has the title. But they have, like, 15 assistant GMs, right? Because Craig Breslow's an AGM, I believe, and is Dan Kantrovitz technically an AGM now too? I can't remember. But right, these guys get these elevated titles.
Woo? Is Ronnie Woo an assistant GM?
He's the assistant GM of Woo Cubs. I'll take an AGM role. To get me from. You just pay me money to not write about you. I mean, that'd be great. I don't know. Well, the Ross situation, I think, will play out based a lot on what happens these next couple of weeks. But I'll say that, we've talked about some of the issues. One of the things that I'm sure Ross could point to in his defense is, I played these guys, but, how did I get these guys? Like, Jed, you gave them to me. Like, this was your idea. So in a sense, he was doing, as Jeremy would say, what he was told to do. I do find it a little bit frustrating that since the trade deadline, former Cub Nelson Velasquez, who was traded the trade deadline, I saw today, has more home runs than any Cub does since the trade deadline. So that's what we call subtraction by subtraction. So while the Cubs did get Candelario, it turns out that Velasquez was the one. Now, I get the fact that, there wasn't as much playing time for him with the Cubs based on position, et cetera. But, yeah, he's got like 11 home runs now in the last 7 weeks. And so good for him, but it sure would have been nice to have that extra power pop last week, I bet, right? Well, but you understand he's a rookie, and he is not one of the guys that got them there.
That is correct.
So he would just be sitting on the bench with no home runs.
Right. Yes. An occasional grand slam when forced into action, but, which what he did here. But, yeah, you're right. And, that is part of the frustrating thing is and it's interesting because the Cubs seem much more likely to use or much more willing to use young pitchers than young hitters. Have you noticed that? They brought up several, and maybe it's just out of like
necessity,
lack of option. Yeah. but they brought up quite a few young pitchers. And in fact, the roster, the bullpen right now is made up almost all of young pitchers because they have no choice, whether they're performing or not. With Steele's still somewhat young, but really, when you look at like Assad and Wicks, I mean, it's two-fifths of the starting rotation, and Wisniewski, and then they're just bringing up everybody. Palencia seems to come up every other day, or I guess he gets sent down to the minors, but not for a full day, usually for like 4 or 6 hours at a time, and then they have to bring him back if somebody gets hurt. Yeah, so.
Well, I want to stick with the pitching for a second. Evan, this will be the last question from me here as we'll march towards the end of this podcast here. But looking ahead, the Cubs, if they are making the playoffs here, who are the 3 starting pitchers you put up against a Philadelphia or a Milwaukee?
Right now, I'm going Steele, Hendricks, Wicks. Those are my 3. Although Assad close to that, but I think he maybe moves back. But I like going left, right, left. Especially with some of the big thumpers. You look at a lot of left-handed thunder in that Phillies lineup. So I think that might help. But then you basically got Assad and Stroman in there as kind of your long relief guys backing them up.
Pat, any last questions for Evan before we wrap it up and call it a podcast?
Yeah, I guess. So as we look towards this coming week, and we talked about how the Cubs are moving the rotation around a little bit. How do you see the role of Marcus Stroman moving forward? Like, what would you think is the ideal situation, and what do you think is going to happen?
I mean, I think the ideal situation would be if they could get him stretched back out, to be able to at least take maybe 4 innings, and whether you're going to piggyback him with Assad or Wicks or someone like that, right? To where, depending on who's more comfortable in the roles, although, I mean, he came back fairly quickly, right? Like initially there was talk that it might be several more weeks before he would even be ready at all. And I think the idea is just that he's not going to be built up for a while. Would he be ready by the playoffs to be able to give you enough innings? I don't know, but I would like to see him be able to get to at least 3 to 4 innings, because I do think there comes a point where you're talking about playoff baseball or whatever, like even if he's not able to get in there and start, you want him to be able to say, hey, for whatever reason, right, whoever's coming up and Jordan Wicks, hey, you've given us 4 innings, or Javier Assad, you've given us your 4. Like, this is getting tough. You're barely getting it through this. We're going to Stroman right away. And then he can eat 3 or 4 more and carry it to, we've seen how beleaguered the back end of the bullpen is right now. No Alcalá, no Fulmer anymore, right? Like, you got to get it to Merriweather, or whomever is going to be back there, or lighter, depending on the line. So to me, it's get him to 3 or 4 innings and let him be that guy who comes in before the starter starts to struggle, right? Whenever that matchup is right, and let him ride for the back half of the game.
I do like the idea of piggybacking him with Wicks, in terms of lefty righty stuff. Also, I like the idea of having Wicks, who maybe go through a lineup once and then leave, and then have Stroman come in. Ideally, get through 3 innings and whatnot. That would be an interesting way to do it. Were you surprised at all, though, that I certainly was, that Stroman pitched back-to-back games right from the get-go when he came back to the Cubs?
Yeah, that was a bit odd. And having him kind of come in those roles, I think a lot of that was probably what there was the extra inning game being such a, it's like, all right, well, hell, it's either you or a position player, so get on out there. But it did, especially like the nature of the injury and everything that he had, and the fact that he hadn't pitched in so long, and it's a totally different situation for him. That definitely felt really, really weird. But I think we were also had Fulmer gone on the IL yet at that point? Had we already known that he was back out? I can't remember when that got announced.
I can't remember either, because he kind of comes back and forth pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, he came back for 1 game
Yeah.
Which is the other, that was the other concerning thing, right? It's like, oh, forearm strain. Hey, that's no big deal. Let's rush you back early, right? But part of that was because they knew Alzolay was hurt. But then he pitches one game, and now he's back on the IL. So it's like, all right, that kind of felt like robbing Peter to pay Paul, and still coming up short on the bill.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap up with predictions. Pat, are you sticking with 5-1 for this upcoming homestand? 3 against Pittsburgh, 3 against Colorado.
I mean, I did make that prediction. I then subsequently looked at the Cubs pitching, and the Colorado series is going to be Tayon, Wicks, and Assad. Yeah, we'll see. Let's hit our way out of that one. I think, yeah, I think I'm going to go. I think I'm still going with 5-1. I do feel like the Cubs are ready to ride that roller coaster back up, just to perplex fans, if nothing else.
Evan, can we lock you in on a prediction?
I really want to say 4-2. I don't feel particularly strong about that, but I would rather say 4-2 than to actually predict him to be worse and be like 500, and then that happens, and then it's on me. So yeah, 4-2, I feel good about.
Get on my shoulders, because I'm going 3-3. It's on me. I feel like 3-3 is an improvement over last. I feel like they're righting the ship at 3-3.
Cubs go 3-3. I think they're going to miss the playoffs, but
I think they're going to right the ship, and then they've got 6 games left. So we'll see. We'll see. Next week we'll find out the positioning of what Atlanta and Milwaukee are likely to do as we run into next week. But for this upcoming week, 3-3, 4-2, and 5-1 on the predictions across the board. So
I will say this is going to be, I think, well, I don't know if it'll be fun or not, but this will be a more interesting last 2 weeks of the season than we had predicted at the beginning of the season. So
it's the most interesting September baseball we've had in years. It's been years. So, yeah, while the collapse is hard to watch over the last week, it is still amazing to have meaningful baseball. It was great at the end of August. It's great in September. It's great to have meaningful baseball as we roll into October. That's all we can ask for. This team should be competitive every single year. There's no excuse for a big market team like the Cubs to not be competitive every single year. We're getting that this year. So even if it's a quick playoff exit this year, at least the expectations need to get back to where we've had them on this podcast the whole time of this team needs to be competitive every single year. And it's been great. It's been great to have competitive baseball again. I've missed it, and it's super fun to watch.
I will feel so guilty if I ended up jinxing them last week when I mentioned the 04 Cubs, and I really hope that's not the case. So please come back and help me, Cubs. That's all I ask.
All right, and with that, we've talked it out. We feel better. We're going into the homestand. Evan, you mentioned a few of your articles that you've got up right now at your website. Please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet.
Yeah, just check out CubsInsider.com. If you prefer to find us via a platform that has changed its name and apparently may go to all paid, in which case you probably won't find us there for very much longer. It's just at Real Cubs Insider on the platform formerly known as Twitter. We are also on Facebook. I would recommend avoiding that at all costs. But if you must be there, just search Cubs Insider and you'll find us there as well.
We are also available on the site formerly known as Twitter, Threads, Instagram, anywhere social media lives. You can find us at Wrigleyville Nat, Facebook.com/Wrigleyville Nation as well. And of course, Patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. That's how we bring this podcast to you ad-free every single year because of our amazing patrons that keep us ad-free. They keep the lights on. Every single penny that's donated over there goes right back into the show, and we appreciate every single patron. If you can't support the show financially during these times, we understand that as well. So please, Cub fans, know other Cub fans. So tell your Cub fan friends about the show. Tell them how to subscribe to the podcast. Show them what the podcast is. And leave a comment, rate, review, subscribe, all of that stuff. Any podcatcher that you choose, we are available on all those platforms. The links to subscribe, everything I described, the entire back catalog of the podcast is all available at the website, WrigleyvilleNation.com. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks,
Go
everyone. Go Cubs, and thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.